we have quite a show for you this evening because for the whole hour, I'm joined by Abby Martin. Now, Abby needs no introduction. I know she's often mentioned in the comments as someone we should get on. Journalist, filmmaker, founder of the Empire Files, and you've got a new film out. We're going to be talking about Abby's film in the second part of the show. And before that, we'll be discussing Iran and Lebanon. First of all, Abby, you haven't been particularly impressed with our studio.
I am very impressed with it, actually. Stop calling me out. Hey, compared to my studio, it's incredible. I was just expecting something massive because you guys make it, you fake it so well, how like professional and polished this operation is. I didn't expect it to be just in a tiny
It looks more
room.
professional on this side of the camera.
Yes.
That's probably fair to say. You know, we're a shabby organisation, but we do try hard. If you want to support us, you know what to do. NovaraMedia.com/support. We are entering week 5 of Israel and the United States war on Iran. And the death toll inside Iran keeps rising. Over 2,000 Iranians have now been killed, 200 of them children. And according to the Iranian Red Crescent, more than 100,000 civilian buildings have been damaged or destroyed. This is horrific, but it's par for the course when it comes to Israel and American actions in the Middle East. What's perhaps been more of a surprise, to many people at least, is the continuing ability of Iran to strike back.
For a military that the US claims to have destroyed, Iran still seems capable of inflicting damage. In the Negev desert, an industrial park burns, the result of Iranian missile strikes on Israel. Today has also seen reports of dozens of drones and missiles fired across the Gulf. It has also emerged that a valuable US spy plane called an AWAC was destroyed in a strike on an airbase in Saudi Arabia. This war does not feel like it's de-escalating.
Those images of this half of a US bomber plane destroyed, I mean, really, really striking over the weekend. That was a BBC report from Sunday. Today, we've got more images of Israeli infrastructure being hit. So these were scenes at an oil refinery in Israel's northern city of Haifa. So this is from earlier today. Israel's Fire and Rescue Service said it had been hit by debris from an intercepted missile. So even when the missiles don't get through, the debris might fall on something which then goes up in smoke. The hope, of course, of the US and Israel was that they could severely damage Iran's missile capabilities in the early days of the war. As you can see here, that's clearly not come to pass. This chart from the military analyst Dmitry Alperovich shows that while Iran's missile and drone strikes declined dramatically in the first week of the war, they have now leveled off. So Iran fired off 63 drones and 40 missiles on Sunday. So it looks like they're in this for the long haul. That failure to destroy Iran's military capacity from the air means the US is now weighing up a ground invasion of Iran. Officials have told the Washington Post that the Pentagon is preparing for weeks of ground operations in the country. However, officials stressed that, quote, any operation would fall short of a full-scale invasion and could instead involve raids by a mixture of special operations forces and conventional infantry troops. Obviously, Donald Trump doesn't want to go to war. Everything is a special operation, but you don't necessarily get to decide where the difference between a special operation and a war is. Given the Americans can't defend their own air bases in neighboring countries, it's unclear how they would keep any special forces inside Iran safe. The Iranian military also is broadcasting its defiance.
Aggression and occupation will yield no result other than the humiliating capture, dismemberment, and disappearance of the aggressors. American commanders and soldiers will become food for the sharks of the Persian Gulf.
The potential costs of any ground invasion means that Donald Trump is falling back on his favourite strategy for getting his way: very violent threats. He posted this to Truth Social today. The United States of America is in serious discussions with a new and more reasonable regime to end our military operations in Iran. Great progress has been made, but if for any reason a deal is not reached, which it probably will be, and if the Hormuz Strait is not immediately open for business, we will conclude our lovely stay in Iran, God, so grotesque, by blowing up and completely obliterating all of their electric generating plants, oil wells, and Karg Island, and possibly all desalination plants, which we have purposefully not yet touched. This will be in retribution for our many soldiers and others that Iran has butchered and killed over the old regime's 47-year reign of terror. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President Donald J. Trump. Let's focus on that tweet to begin with, Abby. I mean, I suppose two significant claims there. One, he is claiming that regime change has happened. So he's saying that we killed the first lot, then the second lot, then the third lot. This is regime change. He seems like he's looking for a way out. At the same time, just to have, the most powerful person in the world saying, I'll stay in Iran and threatening to blow up their water supply, essentially, in a country of 90 million people.
Yeah, it's just beyond horrifying. It's language that I just can't wrap my mind around that's coming from the leader of this global military dictatorship that's had its boot on the Iranian government, or the Iranian people, frankly, for 70 years. This is the culmination of a 70-year project. Look, the tweet is absolutely devastating. It's basically saying we're going to commit war crime upon war crime. Just the casual nature of saying, our stay in Iran after they murdered 160 little girls the first day. And then I just read that they were just testing new missiles. So all of this that happened on the first day, these horrible atrocities, the girls' school and then the gymnasium that killed another 20 or so people, those were just testing for these new weapons. And of course, you have the plausible deniability of AI on top of that. So it's just war crime upon war crime, and the threatening to then bomb the desalination plants, which would have catastrophic consequences. This is on top of unprecedented environmental destruction of constantly bombing oil depots, oil refineries, and then of course you have the retaliatory attacks on oil depots and oil refineries across the Gulf. It's never ending.
Do you think a ground invasion is possible? Because Donald Trump keeps saying, and all his allies keep coming out and saying, we're not into forever wars. This is not going to be Iraq. Don't worry. This is going to be an in and out thing. Obviously, if there is a ground invasion, that all goes out the window. Everyone's sort of asking, is this a threat? Is he putting, special forces and actually thousands of troops on the border of Iran as leverage in potential negotiations? Because I feel like we've asked that so many times. Maybe every time we think something is just for leverage, Donald Trump actually does go to a war.
Yeah.
So it does. Do you think a ground invasion could be on the cards?
Oh, I 100% do. They have no other options at this point because they miscalculated the entire war. They miscalculated the strategy, the tactics, the retaliation from Iran, which is absolutely absurd. When everyone who's a strategist could have told you exactly what would happen and how catastrophic it would be to the global economy. But of course, when you're a hammer, every problem's a nail. And so they continued through with this insane conquest, and now we're seeing the result of this. I think a ground invasion is very, very possible as this war continues because we see what's at stake. And we know Trump. He doesn't like to lose face at all. And the thing is, this man has always said contradictory things throughout his entire presidency. We have to look at what he has done, like you said. So the mask of the rhetoric of negotiations and all of these things, even though it can be very belligerent threats, he will carry through on the most extreme things that he threatens.
I suppose in terms of threats, let's go to a clip of Donald Trump. Apologies. I think this is the last clip of Donald Trump we're going to do this evening. This is him speaking on Air Force One last night.
So we've had very good negotiations today with Iran, getting a lot of the things that they should have given us a long time ago. See how it works out, but they're very good. Moving along very nicely. They've destroyed a lot of additional targets today. The Navy's gone, the Air Force has gone, we know that. But we destroyed many targets today. It was a big day. And we are negotiating with them directly and indirectly. We have emissaries, but we also are dealing directly. And as you know, they've agreed to send 8 boats 2 days ago, and then they added another 2, so it was 10 boats. And now today they gave us as a tribute, I don't know, I can't define it exactly, but they gave us, I think out of a sign of respect, 20 boats of oil, big boats of oil, going through the Hormuz Strait. And that's taking place starting tomorrow morning. Over the next couple of days, a lot of boats. And I would only say that we're doing extremely well in that negotiation. But you never know with Iran because we negotiate with them and then we always have to blow them up.
Now,
wow.
We're going to talk about, I think Trump has misunderstood what these boats going through the Strait of Hormuz, the significance of them, because it's Iranian oil they're carrying and they're not American ships. But we'll park the oil question for a moment and focus on this quote. You never know with Iran because we negotiate with them and then we always have to blow them up. Now, that's not an Iran problem. That's a US problem, right? If they go to negotiations and then the Americans keep killing them, he makes it sound like, and then they force us to kill them. You never know, Iran. Maybe they're going to force us to kill them.
Yeah, it's just like the Israel line, right? Hey, we don't want to kill them, but they're human shields. I mean, they're forcing us to kill their children. I mean, it's absolutely grotesque. It's an inversion of reality, and it always has been. And they're so desperate with their propaganda that this is really all they have. But Trump seems like a sedated, drunk buffoon. I mean, he's up there just saying, we're doing a great job. Anyone can see with their own eyes what's going on. Iran is not waning at all, their missile potential and their drone capacity. So this does look like they are in it for the long haul, Michael. I mean, they are planning for a war of attrition, and it's working. I mean, oil is on the cusp of being $100 a barrel. But yeah, I mean, the fact that Trump could actually say the opposite of what has been happening, right? Every single time that they have pulled Iran to negotiations, they bomb the negotiators. This is the Israel tactic. And we see even today, every single person who's trying to negotiate with the U.S., Israel and the U.S. kill them, sometimes alongside their entire families. So again, it's just it's outrageous. What else is there to say to describe this reality that we're experiencing?
I want to talk a little bit later about, you say he sounds like a bumbling drunk, and what that means in terms of an imperial war, because often these things have bipartisan support because someone can make it sound sort of on some degree reasonable, and he doesn't. But I want to first just talk about oil, because this is another aspect in which this war is sort of materially backfiring for Trump. So in that clip, you saw Trump mentioning that Iran had apparently let some oil tankers through the Strait of Hormuz, he said, as a goodwill gesture to the United States. So he's saying this is a gift. This shows I'm a great negotiator. I mean, the reason the story doesn't add up is because Iran's whole purpose in this war is not to allow no ships to pass through the Strait of Hormuz, but to control precisely which ships pass through. And that's exactly what they're proving they can do, right? So they don't let the ships through that they don't want to go through, but they do let the ships go through which are filled with Iranian oil and which are going to their allies, right? So that comes with big advantages for Iran because they get to sell their oil to their allies and the Americans don't. The Economist this weekend had a fascinating article on how much money Iran is making from the oil crisis caused by Trump and Netanyahu's war. So they say that because the oil price has shot up, but Iran is still managing to export its oil, Iran is in fact making double the amount per day what they were before the war started. So Iran are making double the amount per day before the war started. Now, of course, this doesn't mean the Iranians are having a brilliant time. Their cities are getting bombed. Their infrastructure is getting bombed. I think sort of pretending that Iran is going to come out of this war, unharmed and stronger is misguided. But strategically, this is this is a flop for Americans, that they have doubled the amount they are making in oil while the Americans are paying loads more for petrol, and we're going to see an inflation crisis in the West. Iran and its proxies also significantly still retain the capacity to further limit global oil supplies. On Saturday, the Houthis entered the war for the first time. Lots of people have been coming on the show asking, when's that going to happen? Why haven't they sort of mobilized the Houthis yet? But there was this weekend a missile strike from the Houthis against Israel. We're going to show you another report from the BBC, which explains why that would matter.
In order to avoid the Strait of Hormuz, Saudi Arabia is currently diverting around 4 million barrels of oil a day through a pipeline to Yanbu on the Red Sea coast. Now, that means the oil bound for the Asian market can then sail south in relative safety past Yemen. But that's not always been a safe route. For nearly 2 years, the Houthis attacked international shipping, damaging around 30 vessels. Now they say they could target commercial shipping again, making the Bab al-Mandab Strait a key flashpoint, blocking routes for Saudi oil in both directions, with huge implications for the global economy.
So this is really, potentially America and their allies getting snookered because, Iran, as we've been talking about for weeks, have closed the Strait of Hormuz. In response to that, the Saudis are trying to pump their oil to the other side of Saudi Arabia so it can be exported via ships in the Red Sea. But who controls access to the Red Sea? It's the Houthis. So if you've got the Iranians blocking the Strait of Hormuz, and then you've got the Houthis blocking exit from the Red Sea, basically no oil is going to be able to get out of the Middle East unless the Iranians approve of it. So basically that means that, Saudi oil, Qatari gas is not going to be able to get out, but Iranian oil in Chinese ships will. Again, strategic genius from the Americans. Maybe it is strategic genius from the Israelis because they don't care about global energy markets. They just want to be the hegemon in the Middle East. But it seems from the American perspective to be rather self-defeating. Trump still seems to think he can win the energy war, though. He said this to the Financial Times on Sunday. To be honest with you, my favorite thing is to take the oil in Iran. But some stupid people back in the US say, why are you doing that? But they're stupid. Meanwhile, the Speaker of Iran's parliament appears to be mocking Trump. So he tweeted this on Sunday. So this is the guy that sort of Trump says he's the man in charge who we can negotiate with. He said, heads up, pre-market so-called news or truth is often just a setup for profit-taking. Basically, it's a reverse indicator. Do the opposite. If they pump it, short it. If they dump it, go long. See something tomorrow, you know the drill. So he's basically saying, he tweets that on a Sunday. Again, as we've been talking about throughout the war, the Israelis and the Americans often escalate on the weekend. Then it looks like there's going to be a problem in the market. So Donald Trump tweets late on Sunday night or early on Monday morning, that actually everything's going to be fine. We're going to end the war soon. There's going to be a deal. And that means that investors suddenly get confident and the oil price goes down, only to rise again by about midday on Monday when everyone realizes that, actually there is still a war going on. And actually the Strait of Hormuz is still blocked. So this is Galibaf saying, don't fall for this. So giving quite good investment advice, probably. Abby, I suppose I want to talk to you about, you covered the Iraq war very closely, where it was always debated, that the position of the left was always that this was a war for oil. And then obviously the American government would say, no, this is a war for democracy and to keep people safe from terrorism. So there would be, the idea that America just goes to war to secure oil supplies was an allegation made by the left. Now it's a defense of the war. So Donald Trump is saying, no, I'm not into regime change. I'm not into nation building. I'm going there specifically for the oil. Yeah. I said, what does that mean for resistance to the war? Does that make it easier or does that make it harder? Because when you say it's for oil, he says, yeah, cool, that's fine.
Yeah, now they're saying the whole intent of the whole victory would be actually opening the Strait of Hormuz, as if that wasn't a consequence of this insanity. I think we're teetering on we're on a razor's edge here. It's like, on one hand, of course, it makes this radicalizing moment opportune for people all around the world to mobilize around who the actual enemy is, the apparatus of capitalism spiraling us into this, out of control global imperialism, explicitly stated to pillage and plunder natural resources. We've known forever that this is for oil. But of course, the pretense of human rights and democracy, the idea, the auspices of some sort of benevolent empire, there was a rehabilitation after 9/11. And so it became very tough to explain the case, at least outside of the left, right? But now I think it's really widespread. It's impossible to not just see what Trump is saying himself, that this is about oil. Iran has the third largest oil reserves in the world. But really, we have protest fatigue. I think people in general that have been protesting this genocide because it's been under a Democratic administration for so long, and then, it was incubated, given to Trump. And so now people just don't know how to resist the war. It's a full frontal assault. It's a multi-pronged assault on every faction. I mean, every factor of our lives, nature, our reality, Gaza, Lebanon, Iran, it's so much going on. ICE in the streets. So how do you mobilize against fascism when people couldn't even mobilize to stop the genocide under Biden?
I mean, I suppose how much can mobilization achieve in that situation? I suppose if there were more mobilization, more direct action, maybe that could have had more impact. I want to talk about to what extent you think this is a rational conflict, because we were speaking earlier before, and I mean, the analysis I basically have, and that lots of our guests have had, is that this is not really a war that was fought through. It's not obviously in America's imperial interest to do this. It's not clear there was a strong business lobby sort of begging Donald Trump to go to war with Iran. It seemed like there was one country and one leader who had a thought out plan here, which was Netanyahu, who doesn't really mind about energy or chaos. He just wants Israel to be the only military sort of hegemon in the Middle East. We had Daniel Levy, a former Israeli negotiator, saying on the show a couple of weeks ago, basically saying Israel wants there to be no alternative in the Middle East and there to be chaos, so that all countries in the Middle East have to rely on Israel as the policeman. They want to be basically the America of the Middle East, not necessarily relying on America. So they sort of want to break free, is what he was saying. And they're using Donald Trump as the last opportunity they might have to invade Iran. And so that analysis suggests this isn't really in America's imperial interests. It's in Israel's imperial interests. And Donald Trump was gullible and stupid enough to go along with it. And that's why the justifications keep changing. And that's why he's sort of struggling to create a sort of solid coalition in favor of this that's speaking from the same script. Before we went live, you were saying you think that lets Donald Trump off the hook, not just sort of ethically, because I think no one's trying to sort of excuse him ethically, but also sort of in terms of what this war is about. You think this is in America's imperial interests?
Indeed, yeah. This is, look, I've heard this said a lot to kind of absolve Trump and absolve America's role in this, is that he was dragged into this and that potentially he's being blackmailed because of the Epstein files and a gun is put to his head. How does that explain Cuba, Venezuela, all of the other imperial conquests that are being, that he's positioning around the world? But aside from that, this is the culmination of a 70-year project. We can go back to Mossadegh in 53. This was always trying to tamp down on leaders who didn't bow down to the dictates of global capitalism. Back then, I mean, it was about nationalizing oil. Mossadegh wasn't even a leftist. He was just an independent, non-aligned leader. Then, of course, upholding the Shah, this horrific torture regime, and then, of course, shooting down the airliner, backing Iraq in the Iran-Iraq war where 1 million people died. And then, of course, the sanctions regime. The sanctions regime crippling the infrastructure, depriving ordinary citizens of medicine, spiraling, economically asphyxiating Iran, the assassination of Soleimani. I mean, you look at just the grand chessboard of what the U.S. wants. They want imperial domination in that region of the world. Of course, they have similar interests to Israel. They use Israel as their military garrison, their attack dog in the Middle East, to do what the U.S. necessarily doesn't want to come out front and do. So they'll get behind Israel and be like, well, now it's our war because we need to defend our greatest ally in the Middle East. They love that Israel goes and does these things and makes actually the U.S. look less crazy and less evil. They've set a new standard for now making the U.S. look better than it is. So this has been a long-standing project. You go back to Wesley Clark, the former NATO commando, being told by the Bush administration, 7 countries in 5 years. Iran was the only country left. This is decades in the making. So Netanyahu, of course, wants to destroy Iran. The U.S. maybe wants a more pliable leader so they can bow down to U.S. hegemony. But do not mistake, the U.S. wants this. They have always wanted to crush Iran. That is what this is about. They wouldn't just go along with Israel if this didn't serve them in the end. And it doesn't necessarily mean short-term profits. This is about remaking the entire Middle East in their image.
I suppose the sort of causal sequence of events, though, because Obama, I mean, he wasn't pro-Iranian sovereignty, but he did sign a nuclear deal, so there was going to be sanctions lifted if they didn't enrich uranium above a certain level. We had Robert Malley, who was the lead negotiator, on Friday's show, very interesting guy. And as far as I understand, that wasn't ripped up because of any business lobby or really lobby from the US deep state. It was ripped up because the Israelis didn't like it, and then Donald Trump didn't like it because Obama signed it. And so it does seem like the reason we are in this particular situation we're in right now is because Donald Trump didn't like Obama and Netanyahu didn't want there to be any kind of rapprochement with Iran. So I suppose the causality here seems to be more, let's say, accidental is the wrong word, but sort of to say it was sort of pushed by the sort of structural necessities of American empire. It seems like it was more arbitrary than that, if you see what I mean. But I want to draw this out.
You forget an administration in between, Biden.
But
he did nothing to negotiate the nuclear deal, renegotiate the nuclear deal.
So what Robert Malley was saying was that, I mean, he was also the Iran lead under Biden, but he said Biden basically didn't feel he had the political capital and didn't invest enough time in it. So it wasn't so much that Biden actively was hoping for some kind of war with Iran. It's that he thought the political situation meant that going back into this wasn't worth it. And also, actually, the Iranians weren't particularly interested in signing a deal if the Americans couldn't guarantee that Donald Trump wouldn't win an election in 3 years' time and just rip it up again.
I think that's bullshit. I think, I think that Biden, he's an ardent Zionist. He was one of the most unapologetic Zionists in the entire Congress. I mean, for decades. What he did, I've talked to several people who left the administration over Gaza. And I asked all of them, why? It's so counterintuitive to even U.S. imperialism, U.S. hegemony. Why?
Why Gaza or why Iran?
Gaza first.
Okay.
And they said it stopped with Biden.
Yep.
The buck stopped with him. So I have to imagine that Biden was not interested in doing the nuclear negotiations. He had Sullivan, he had Blinken, I mean, the same national security team that Obama had. There's no reason for Cuba and Iran, unless it really stopped with Biden in terms of being completely disinterested and just wanting to dutifully go along with what Israel wanted to, because he found them such important allies. I mean, Trump is a whole nother game because he, his son-in-law is personally invested in this. Netanyahu would go stay in Jared Kushner's childhood bedroom when he would come to New York to visit. Very odd. So it's so incestuous that it's really hard to unpack and, in that regard. But I think you're right in the sense that Trump is the chaos president. So all of the outlier crazy people, the neocons, the warhawks, the Gusanos from Miami, I mean, all of them are attaching their agenda, the most extreme agenda, onto Trump because they see him as a vehicle. He's a con artist. He cares nothing about morality. He has no morals at all. So they want to ram through everything they can because they feel like this is their political capital. So I think all of those factors caused this.
I just want to we're going to move on in one moment. I suppose just because it's a topic that comes up so much on this show and so much on sort of the YouTube sphere, because you've got John Mearsheimer and those kind of people on one side, Trita Parsi as well, who comes on here, who are very much saying this war is against America's interests. And the Israel lobby is so out of control that it's managed to drag America into a war which is against America's interests. And you're on the other side. I mean, it's a very reasonable debate on both sides. But how would you summarize how this is in America's interest? In what way is this war on Iran in any part of America's interest? Corporate America, other than the Zionist lobby, which is a lobby in and of itself, it's not really connected to America's interest. Why does this help American empire to be starting this, stupid war?
Well, because Iran is the big prize. It always has been. I mean, the entire war on terror was basically a stepping stone to get to Iran. That was the inevitability. They always painted Iran as some sort of master puppeteer in the Middle East that was administering everything from IUDs in Iraq to narco gangs in Venezuela. I mean, it's really the ultimate propaganda machine. And so when you take down that head, you've reshaped the Middle East in your image. And so that is the ultimate prize, and it always has been. So you have to look at the actual holistic view of decades long policymaking that has geared us to this point. A bipartisan consensus on the sanctions regime, the demonization of Iran, laying the foundational groundwork for even letting this happen, having the impunity allowed to facilitate this war and continue to carry it on. I am definitely in the, I was going to say the Chomsky versus Mearsheimer, but it's not really popular to talk about Chomsky right now. But no, I don't think the tail wags the dog. I think it's absurd, again, to think that this small settler colony dictates what happens in the U.S. Everyone who's in Congress is a Zionist. You have to be a true believer in the system. You have to be a capitalist, a Zionist, an imperialist. It just is par for the course. So it's not like AIPAC's coming and bribing these people to be loyalists to Israel. They get into the positions because they're Zionist already. It's kind of the same as corporate media journalists. You're not told to lie. Sometimes I think AIPAC, of course, the undue influence because of how much it's been subsidized by the U.S. So it kind of is a runaway train where now it's, undermining actual First Amendment rights, using this absurd notion of anti-Semitism to tamp down on our constitutional liberties. So there's definitely an argument to be made about how out of control the lobby is, certainly. But I do not think it's what's driving the war in Iran.
During its genocide against the people of Gaza, Israel killed over 200 journalists, and they're now following the same playbook in Lebanon. A funeral ceremony was held on Sunday for the 3 journalists who were killed when an Israeli airstrike targeted a vehicle they were traveling in near the city of Jazin in southern Lebanon. The deceased include Al-Manar TV correspondent Ali Schweib, Al-Mayadeen correspondent Fatima Fatouni, and a cameraman. Lebanese President Joseph Aoun said the attack constitutes a, quote, blatant crime that violates all norms, and called on international bodies to take action. And there was also condemnation from Western journalists, or some of them at least. Jeremy Bowen from the BBC said journalists are not legitimate targets, no matter who they work for. This is a surprising one, though. Even Fox News didn't seem entirely convinced by the Israeli explanation for the targeted killing.
3 Lebanese journalists were killed, including Ali Shuaib, who worked for the Hezbollah-affiliated Al Manor television network. The IDF accused Shuaib of operating as a member of Hezbollah's Radwan forces and included a photo of him wearing a military uniform. When asked by Fox News about the source of the photo, the IDF responded, quote, "Unfortunately, there isn't really a picture of it. It was photoshopped." The IDF announced they have conducted new raids into southern Lebanon over the weekend, taking troops from southern Syria into southern Lebanon.
Now, do you think that Israel thought that when they sent, because I feel like they sent that email as a friendly one to Fox News, saying like, you probably shouldn't, this story isn't that helpful to us. Like, unfortunately, there isn't a picture. We did Photoshop it. I don't think they thought that Fox News was going to put that quote up on screen.
Yeah, well, Jonathan Conricus, the guy who looks like a Minecraft square head guy, former IAF spokesperson, Swedish guy, he responded to this Fox News reporter saying, "How dare you quote this low-level IDF official when you knew better? Like, basically, how dare you quote an actual official from the military saying this?" It's like, what? I mean, I was surprised also at the Fox News reporter, but this guy's been kind of decent in his coverage on Gaza.
That thing of how dare you quote, that happened a lot at the start of the genocide in Gaza, when people would quote what Israeli officials had said, often what they'd said in Hebrew, where they'd sort of been talking about, everyone's animals, or they want to turn it into dust, or yada, yada, yada. And people would say, well, stop quoting. That was after October the 7th. They were angry then. They were lashing out. It's like, he's the defense secretary. You don't get to just say, oh, he was angry. Give him a break. He is articulating genocidal intent while bombing schools and hospitals. I don't really see why we need to give him a break.
Yeah, he tweets Amalek when he just gets stressed. No, I mean, it's crazy. I mean, it's like translate a tweet in Hebrew and you just are like from the pages of just Nazi Germany. It's really, really crazy when you see just how blatant the rhetoric is to essentially just incite the death of children.
I want to talk about the media response to this war. I suppose on a similar line to my line of questioning in the first part, which is that, what seems slightly different about this war compared to, say, like the war on terror, is that Donald Trump didn't take much time to sort of build up this coalition of sort of allied elites who were going to go out to bat for him. And, I'm sure sort of the framing in the New York Times still, treats Israel as the sort of the ally, the more normal country, and the Iranians' lives as a bit less valuable. But it doesn't seem to be the case that the US media is sort of lining up and saying this war is great, anyone is unpatriotic who criticizes it. It feels to me from afar like this is quite different from the Iraq war in terms of how the media have responded to it. And I want to know, first of all, if you agree with that. Obviously, you watch more American media than I have. And if you think that's significant in terms of how this plays out.
I do, yeah. It's disturbing in a way to see that there wasn't even an attempt to condition the public, manufacture any sort of propaganda campaign. Like you said, the intentions have been all over the place, the justifications all over the place. There's no set narrative. So in a way, it's disturbing to think that they know that they don't even need that. They don't even need to try. And the media continues to toe the line. The media continues
to towing the line, though? That's what I'm asking.
Yes. Well, just like the Gaza playbook. Defensive strikes, right? This is a war of defense. And then you saw, this is what's weirder to me, is that there was less European leaders behind the war in Iraq. The Coalition of the Willing was a ragtag group of countries that, were basically subordinate to the US. You see more European leaders kind of kowtowing to this, apologizing for it, which I find shocking. Because this is Donald Trump. This is a maniac. This is a bloodthirsty maniac who's subsidizing genocide that we've been watching for 3 years. So that's what's alarming to me, is why is Europe doing this more so than they were 20 years ago?
I think the answer is probably Ukraine, right? So at the moment, European leaders are all terrified that America is going to withdraw their support for European defense against Russia. And so while they're, while they want to keep some distance from the war, other than Spain, they haven't been willing to sort of stand up to Donald Trump because they're terrified that he's going to cut them off, that he's going to apply sanctions. So I think there is, a sort of material strategic reason why the opposition of France, let's say, is less strong now than it was against Iraq, even though this war is even more stupid.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
No justification has been, they haven't bothered to justify it. At
Right.
least with Iraq, they bothered to justify it, right? It was a bad justification and it was a disaster of a war, but they took it to the UN, even if the UN didn't agree.
Right.
This time around, Donald Trump doesn't make any pretense. And I agree with you. It is, shocking that European leaders aren't willing to stand up to him. But I think that is the explanation. I don't know, maybe you disagree.
No, I mean, look, the Iraq War was basically all under the pretense of Iraq getting WMDs, as we know. It was holding up the vial. It was talking about the mushroom cloud is going to come any day. So that's what's so interesting to me is that this whole narrative of Iran getting a nuclear weapon has been so proven false, even by the U.S.'s own intelligence community, even Trump's own administration, right? Tulsi Gabbard a couple months ago was basically refuting the claim. So the terror campaign, I mean, after 9/11, it made sense, right? Even though I never bought into it, and a lot of other people didn't, the fear was so palpable that I get why people were swept in and supported this. Now you have this huge fissure of public support. Only 30% of Americans support this war, and only 7% support sending ground troops in. But it really shows you just how detached the ruling class is. They don't need to garner support. They don't need to even try, which alarms me in a different way, because it shows you the level of impunity is so extreme that I think, and that's why Trump's saying, Cuba's next, Cuba's next. No one's going to stop him. Who's going to stop them?
I mean, is there not going to be, there'll be an electoral cost, presume? Because obviously, George W. Bush, when he went into Iraq, that was amazing for him electorally. He won the next presidential election, with flying colors because he had created a coalition behind that war. Now, it's going to be too late for the people of Iran and the people of Cuba and the people of Venezuela. But because this is an unpopular war, presumably it will have political costs for the Republican Party, or you don't even think that's likely.
I mean, it's really hard to say. I mean, there's been this kind of fantasy pushed on us that MAGA is anti-war, and that's why they voted for Trump. I don't believe that at all. You see the base of Trump's support, and they support the war. The base of Republicans support what's going on. In terms of Democrats, of course, they're going to probably have an electoral landslide. But the thing is, they're going to pin it on Trump, just like Israeli society is going to pin what's happening on Netanyahu. So when you have a fall person to kind of wash away these horrific atrocities and this new world that they've incubated for us, that's really dangerous, because the Democrats are going to get in and still have the entire framework that got us to where we are. They've pushed for sanctions. They've demonized Iran for decades. So yeah, what I'm worried about is they're going to just, and you see John Bolton, you see people who've been writing op-eds saying bomb Iran, coming out and being like, this is a strategic plunder, or like a blunder. This shouldn't have been done this way.
That's quite a Freudian slip. A strategic plunder.
Might as well have said
It was supposed to be a strategic plunder, and it's ended up a strategic blunder, you could say.
But like that to me is them trying to distance themselves from how bad it's going, because then they can be like, well, we didn't want it done this way, but hey, it's already done. Trump's out, and now we can just move forward with our goals. So that's what I fear is going to happen. I hope that people are held accountable, but it doesn't seem like they will be.
The US military is the world's most polluting institution, and a new documentary by Abby Martin exposes just how far the environmental damage of the US war machine goes. This is the trailer for Earth's Greatest Enemy.
Where we're heading is extremely grim. So we have to brace ourselves for what's coming.
There are still many secrets. The water on the base was contaminated, hence all the dead babies. Oh, shit.
These toxic chemicals are in the blood of my people.
They have littered our land with bombs.
Fire in the hole!
We used to have a lot of animals. Just keep quiet. Do you hear a bird?
The United States military is the #1 polluter in the world.
I have not authorized this.
The military is untouchable.
Let me take a look at the picture.
They consider themselves above the law.
They're filming us.
The military being the single largest consumer of fossil fuels on the planet, how can they be given a free pass?
The emissions from the military should be exempt. Do you agree with that?
I want to say thank you to our National Guard.
We must stop this violent death machine if we want to survive on this earth.
Great trailer.
Yeah, great trailer, if you say so yourself. Abby Martin, great movie. Earth's Greatest Enemy. Tell me why you decided to focus on the environmental impact of the US military.
And I think it's so obvious seeing the unprecedented, according to experts, environmental destruction in Iran right now. This is going to have generational impacts globally. This is not contained to Iran. Pollution has no borders. This has always been kind of something that we heard in the periphery, especially in academic circles, that the US military as an institution was the world's largest polluting entity. And then unpacking that, what does that really mean? I was so alarmed to learn that that was just oil purchases on paper alone, 270,000 barrels a day. When you extrapolate that out and realize it doesn't count the life cycle emissions, the extraction of rare earth minerals, and of course the application of the weaponry, which is war. And just the maintenance of the military arsenal alone is dumping so much toxic chemicals into the groundwater. Every base is a story of contamination. So it seemed so obvious, as someone who is passionate about the environment and who's also an anti-imperialist journalist, that this issue needed to be synthesized, and it needed to be synthesized now. And so my partner, Mike Preisner, and I, the same team that did Gaza Fights for Freedom at the Empire Files, we decided to take on the totality of the problem. And holy shit, it's a gargantuan beast. And so it took 5 years to really break this all down.
Obviously, you know, the film came out before the war in Iran, but I still have in my mind as sort of the most viscerally shocking image of the war in Iran so far is on that first weekend after, I think it was the Israelis who did it, where they bombed the oil depots on the outskirts of Tehran, and then the whole of Tehran was just covered in this sort of black cloud full of sort of toxic chemicals. I wonder if sort of after making this movie, you sort of saw those images and sort of felt like, okay, this is my movie being born out in real life.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that you don't want to be proven right about over and over again. That's the problem with the left, is we're right too early. It's horrific and it's devastating to think the movie that we made was the system that gave us this inevitability of the war in Iran. And this is what the status quo is. I mean, a machinery of death and destruction. So yeah, it's been horrifying to watch.
And one thing I didn't realize before watching it, I should have done, for my sins, I hadn't realized this before watching it, is that while the military is obviously a big emitter, it's excluded from climate talks. So Kyoto, the Paris Accords, countries come and put forward their targets for how much they're going to lower emissions, but the military is excluded. Why do they say that? I mean, I think our viewers will sort of intuitively understand why that's a problem. But what argument did people put to you to say why that's appropriate?
Oh, national security. You can't put our country at risk by exposing the expanse of our military arsenal. And so that's really the cartoonish nature of what underlines all of this and what underpins all of this, is that it's the exposure of how much oil is consumed and used to maintain a military empire, and that it somehow threatens our national security. But when you look at all of these climate conferences ever since Kyoto, in Paris, it became voluntary. I'm sure everyone's really, chomping at the bit to put their voluntary military missions in there. But Clinton, this was a market-oriented approach that Bill Clinton and then the neoliberal model wanted to put forward. It was never about curbing the totality of emissions. It was basically trying to make money off of a problem. And that's been the entire problem with neoliberalism. And that's why you've had this kind of detached public who doesn't even believe that it's real, because they see elites profiting off of what could be the solution. And so people like Al Gore and Bill Clinton pushed this market-oriented approach and basically created an immunity around the military, which means we're not actually counting emissions. How are we going to get to net zero at 2050 if we're not actually counting cumulatively emissions? It makes no sense.
And how did you, because I've been sort of looking up, I know you I think you've got the total sort of emissions in your film, haven't you? And I was looking up percentages today. And I mean, it is different. Everyone seems to have a different one. So I was looking at Guardian, the Pentagon, the US Armed Forces and DOD is the world's largest institutional greenhouse gas emitter, accounting for at least 1% of total US emissions. That's according to analysis by Netta Crawford at Brown University. That sounds low to me, because from the same article it said the total military carbon footprint in the world is estimated at 5.5% of global emissions. So sort of total. I don't understand how it would be much lower in America than the rest of the world, given they've got larger military. But I'll do this as an open question. How did you sort of assess this in terms of numbers and in terms of, because obviously in climate, it is helpful to see how big a problem is this compared to other things. So what is the percentage of military emissions, the percentage of emissions that come from the military in your understanding and come from the American military specifically?
Well, the problem is it becomes unquantifiable and difficult to process because of the global military empire that the U.S. controls. They're not just enforcing the U.S. military. They're using UK infrastructure. They have proxy forces. They're funding, conflicts all around the world. It's the great power competition, the military buildup with Russia and China as a reaction to this kind of belligerence from the U.S. So it's actually impossible to quantify. But when you're looking at that statistic, that is just the oil purchases. So it's ebbed and flowed. Netta Crawford's book's really important to kind of document how it's waned and risen over the course of the last couple decades, because the military would actually point to that and be like, look, we're actually using less oil. They tried to position themselves as like stewards of the environment. During the Obama administration, during the Biden administration even, they were trying to repackage the propaganda to basically say, we want you to like come into the military to fight climate change. We're gonna help the generation, Gen Z, like be a part of this whole apparatus to save the environment. But then that's just completely gone out the window. Just like the pretense of human rights, democracy, it's all about oil.
Hegseth tweeted, didn't he, that the US military doesn't care about this climate crap.
Yeah, this climate crap.
With Trump in charge. It has gone down, so it's, again, this is from that same Guardian article. It has gone down, right? So this is telling me, as defense spending has declined, as a proportion of GDP, emissions from the DoD, so the Department of Defense has declined. So it was, 100.
Yeah, at the peak of the war on terror, it's obviously higher.
It's half what it was in the 80s, is what this is suggesting, but still high.
Still very high. And when you count in NATO, the proxy forces, and everything to maintain the arsenal, remember, this is just oil purchases, it becomes completely impossible to really figure out.
And you weren't just limited to sort of carbon emissions in your documentary. I mean, the bit that sort of surprised me is that there was bullets apparently have an environmental sort of after effect after a war, which I hadn't realized at all. So I think there's sort of hundreds of thousands of bullets in Iraq and Afghanistan.
There's an estimated 250,000 bullets that were used for every person killed. Estimates of at least 1 million people obviously dead.
And they have lead and other sort of toxic.
Lead, depleted uranium, just all of these toxic compounds that are just become pulverized powder, and then of course enter the atmosphere through water, air, and people are still breathing in these toxic chemicals today, and they're just embedded in the environment. I mean, kids are growing up with congenital heart failure because of the legacy of toxic contamination in Iraq. There's still dead zones in World War I from small armaments. So just imagine the advancement of technology with the arsenal and how much more deadly. Just the fact that we put depleted uranium coating on bullets just to make it more effective at destroying material when these have a shelf life of 500,000 years. This is how short-sighted the insanity is.
Again, I didn't know we did that. We put depleted uranium on bullets so that they... Why?
So they could penetrate buildings better.
Oh.
Yeah, so now there's a whole toxic legacy of depleted uranium all across the Middle East.
I'm tempted to ask about
because of this,
the science. I do not understand why depleted uranium would make it easier for a bullet to go for a wall, but that's neither of us are physicists. But that's so interesting. That's
horrifying.
Very grim as well. I suppose if we're moving towards, so you talk a lot about U.S. empire, the Empire Files. This movie's about the U.S. military and its global footprint. Lots of people think we're moving to a multipolar world. How do you feel about that? I mean, do you feel like a multipolar world will be more or less militaristic, and will its military have sort of a greater environmental footprint than when there was sort of the United States as this global hegemon? How are you feeling about that?
I mean, I think we need to completely re-envision the way that the world operates. The fact that we're all subjected to this machinery of global capitalism and being subjugated at the barrel of a nuclear-armed gun by my government's military empire. It needs to change. I think a multipolar world does not necessarily mean a safer world when you have competing powers that have strong militaries. That's how world wars start. And like you said, they could happen by accident. It's not necessarily intentional. That's how competition works when you're trying to gain advantage over resources. And we're in an increasingly we're in a period entering of scarcity, right? It's been abundance, and now with the way capitalism is going, it's a finite planet, and they're treating it as infinite. And so I see a potential for something beautiful. I mean, it seems so dystopian and bleak now, but I've heard it be called the precipice of the abyss and hope. It's like we do have a moment that we can transform the world for our collective benefit. But yes, it's not going to be pretty. I mean, right now the U.S. is like a wounded animal trapped in the corner, and it's lashing out militarily, violently. It's desperate with its propaganda. The same with Israel. It knows that it has very little political standing. It's lost the political consciousness of the world. All these institutional bodies that were created to protect, this idea of human rights and democracy, they're completely collapsed. Everything's demolished. And so there is a space for us to seize. I don't know what that looks like, but I don't think it looks like just competing empires anymore. I think that we have a moment to really reshape this in the image that we know will serve humanity.
If you look at politics at the moment, so I mean, I think everyone can see that the American empire is declining and it's lashing out, right? That's uncontroversial. I mean, especially looking at what's happening in Iran, sort of more than anything, lashing out, and it's sort of a disaster not just for the people of Iran, but I mean for everyone, essentially. It's interesting though, because the response of we're based in Europe. I think in East Asia, Japan, it's similar. The response of lots of governments that fall under the Americans' umbrella is not to say, okay, you're a declining power that's acting irrationally, so go away, we'll do this ourselves. They're saying, please stay, because our whole sort of geopolitical strategy has relied on being under your defense umbrella. In Europe, obviously, this is made more, people think it's more urgent because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. In Japan, they're upping their military spending, and presumably because they see the rise of China as some kind of threat. So how do you relate to that? Sort of, if you've got this critical analysis of US empire, but there are large parts of the world that are saying, America, please stay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's because they have been the junior subordinate partners of empire. They're complicit in the imperial machinery, and it needs to stop. I don't think NATO should exist. I don't think that this machinery of empire should exist. I want to demilitarize all of the bases. I want to shut down this infrastructure, and we can let the pieces fall where they may. I think European leaders, rather, are just desperate to maintain their dominance. This is about throwing the global south under the bus. This is about them maintaining this partnership with the US, but I think it's becoming so exposed as just a savage barbarism. It's law of the jungle now. After what's happened in Gaza, the gloves are off. So Europeans are in a really difficult place because it's, there's only so much polite fascism that you can really hide behind.
I suppose specifically in Europe, because I know you want NATO disbanded. There's currently sort of debate within the Green Party about that. And I suppose the reason why European electorates, let's say, are somewhat divided about this. I mean, overwhelmingly support remaining in NATO, but Donald Trump is presumably reducing support for it somehow, is because Russia invaded Ukraine. Europe hasn't invested that much. It hasn't been spending that much on defense as a proportion of GDP over the past 40 years. So it has been reliant on sort of the American security umbrella. Now it's worried that umbrella is not as strong as it once was. So I suppose it's, we can say we would like this world where everyone demilitarizes and we sort of relax a bit. We sort of say, maybe we can all just be friends and we don't invest so much in our military industrial complex. That's not what European governments and European publics are thinking at the moment. It doesn't seem to be what the Japanese are thinking at the moment. So I suppose, is your argument...
But it's only a reaction to the US. That's why they're doing this.
Who Russia?
Japan... I mean, every country reacting more hardline militarily because the U.S., they see the writing on the wall.
So Japan, one of the reasons they would have spent less on their military is because they were under. So obviously there are lots of countries that have wanted to be under the American security umbrella. I mean, Ukraine is desperate to be under the American security umbrella, as are the Japanese. So it's sort of like if America withdraws from those countries, they're probably going to be inclined to invest more in their own militaries, which might be good. I think Europe should become sort of more independent militarily. But I think there's a strong argument that the drawing back of American empire actually will create sort of more military spending overall, because you'll have all of these countries that think they need their own deterrent, which seems to be happening already, right? All of Europe, Japan, everyone is increasing their military spending because they think that the Americans can't protect them anymore.
Yeah, I mean, well, right now you have the imposition of 5% NATO spending. It's completely insane. There's no binding agreement that, there's no binding law that forces them to do it, but they're going to do it anyway, which is going to make them more enslaved to the U.S. And you see what's happening to Spain. You see the German foreign minister basically being like, yeah, sanction Spain because they won't do the 5% NATO spending. What the hell is going on? I mean, it's just going to make them completely subservient more to U.S. power. Look, I think that that Europeans need to step up. European leaders, the only reason this is happening is because of this normalization. So yes, of course they're scared of losing supremacy. Of course they are. But this needs to stop. This is the Fourth Reich. So right now we're in a situation where it's World War II and we have no allied powers coming to save the world. We have the Fourth Reich marching on, and European allies are just the doormats to this global takeover. It's horrifying. So yeah, it might be unsettling for a bit to figure out how can they get their footing again, but do we have any other choice?
Well, I suppose I'm just saying, if the Europeans are thinking that they need to have sort of a stronger defense because Russia now has invaded Ukraine, obviously like the Poles, the Estonians are going to be desperate for European rearmament. There's an argument whether we need to in Britain because Russia isn't about to invade us, but there clearly are sort of countries who are on the border with Russia. And I suppose just the argument of we don't need strong militaries has always sort of struggled historically and seems to be sort of struggling even more now because we are in what seems like a more violent world, in part because of American imperialism in the Middle East, but it's not just the Americans.
I think that we don't need to build up a military empire. I'm not talking about being defenseless. I'm not talking about decommissioning the militaries. I just think that this is a very, very bad trajectory where militarism is the solution. And every cent that's taken out, that's put into the 5% NATO spending is taken out of the coffers of social services. This is obvious. So it's just going to continue to hollow out the infrastructure of civil society to feed this beast. But I think that the biggest threat in the world, the biggest purveyor of violence and terrorism is obviously my government in conjunction with Israel. And until the world joins together to stop this, we can't even foresee what's next. We can't even envision a more peaceful or collaborative world. We need to stop what's right in front of our faces, which is Donald Trump in position, at the helm of U.S. empire, destroying the planet.
How are you feeling about the rise of China? I'm going in 2 weeks. I'm very excited about it. But are you positive about that? Do you see that as sort of a possible counterbalance to U.S. power in the world?
Of course. I mean, of course, what China's doing, look, you look at their emissions. I've been told, why don't you incorporate China? They've absorbed all of our manufacturing. You have to look at cumulative emissions. None of this happens in a vacuum. But what they're doing to try to wane off of fossil fuels is really admirable in a country that massive. To do that, I think, it's astonishing what a modicum of central planning can do. So yes, of course. I mean, just the fact that China is, helping buy Iranian oil and doing other things behind the scenes to try to deter the U.S., to try to hurt U.S. in these efforts, I think is great. But yeah, I mean, I think China as a whole, I mean, people, to actually point to China and say that they're imperialist or they're trying to do, that if we weren't the empire China or Russia would be, I think it's based on just complete ahistorical nonsense. Nothing China has done remotely compares to what the U.S. is doing to dominate the planet.
Russia seems more imperialist than China, right? I'd agree that like China's rise has been remarkably peaceful, but Russia doesn't seem like its sort of current state of being is particularly peaceful. I don't know. I mean, they invaded Ukraine. I mean, the thing is, I blame Western powers just as much as I do Russia. It's really hard to just single out Russia as like an imperialist power when I look at what my own government did to drive this. And you think what that was sort of having Americans in Ukraine and the 2014 sort of Maidan movement? Of course. I mean everything. Victoria Nuland on the ground. I mean, fomenting everything that happened. And then plus you put NATO right up on the doorstep where you can have nukes like be carried. I mean, this is exactly what they were warning that they would never do.
in all the waves of buildup of NATO, they had promised never put NATO on our doorstep. And then, of course, I mean, you're poking the bear. What do you think's going to happen? I'm not defending it. It was a criminal war. But I think that my country is very responsible and for also stymieing negotiations and a peace settlement between Ukraine. And also Boris Johnson was too. So Western leaders have basically stalled a peace settlement in Ukraine and used Ukrainians as cannon fodder. And I don't agree with that. I don't agree with a war of attrition trying to bankrupt Russia and using and spending hundreds of thousands of lives to do that. Like Hillary Clinton said, it's the Afghanistan model. That's disgusting.
I mean, I think lots of that is very much valid. I do think that other countries also have their own expansionist ideologies, right? It's not just the United States and Israel. So Putin, very specifically after his invasion of Ukraine, there were lots of people arguing that this was, to a large degree a result of NATO expansion, whether or not you consider sort of Maidan a coup or an uprising. There are lots of ways in which the West was quite provocative to the Russians, let's face it. But when Putin gave his 2-hour-long speeches, he was often talking about a greater Russia, right? He was often speaking in very explicitly imperialist language. He wasn't saying like, oh, I'm a guy who just wants to keep myself to myself, but the Americans kept poking the bear. He's saying like, Ukraine has always been Russia, it's not a real country.
Yeah, he also threw Lenin under the bus. Yeah, he just said a lot of shit.
But so what I mean is there the analysis of sort of what is the military strategy going to be for Europe, for most countries?
I don't know. I mean, what do you think it should be?
I mean, I think that probably the Europeans are going to slowly have to build up their own deterrence while slowly disengaging from the United States and building up some kind of technological, military, economic sovereignty. But I think that it's actually quite a difficult moment now to argue for winding down military spending. I mean, potentially we've gone too far in the other direction and everyone's a bit too panicked about spending more of it. But it does seem plausible to me that we did have a sort of long peace dividend after the Cold War, after the Second World War. I mean, military spending has been declining ever since the Second World War. That was partly because we relied on the United States as a sort of predictable power who could provide a security umbrella. That's gone away, and the Europeans are going to have to step up, maybe some kind of European army. But I do think that now is a difficult moment to make the argument for sort of a broad-based de-armament. Very much against expeditionary warfare. I think get the fuck out of the Middle East, right? We don't need all these aircraft carriers. So you could also say we could spend a similar amount,
let's at least
redeploy
try to shut down
defense.
U.S. bases. How about let's start there? Let's shut down U.S.
I suppose
bases.
then it's, did the Japanese want the Americans to shut down the bases? Because, in your movie, you've got the people in Okinawa who are from that local island saying, there's too much environmental damage.
That's where all the bases are. There's only a couple in
But the Japanese government are like, we want the Americans to stay because we're worried about what happens if they go. Is that not the case?
Yeah, well, we don't care. I mean, I don't care what the Japanese government wants. Who cares?
Well, I suppose you don't care what the Japanese government wants, what the Japanese people want?
But all the governments are going to say, of course we want the American military there because they want the power, like they want to be protected, like you said. So, but shouldn't we listen to what the people want? The people are overwhelmingly opposed to the bases
But the people of Japan in general, right? In that local area they might be, but I assume Japan is very much in favor of being part of the American security
Japanese
umbrella.
people don't want the bases there. That's why they're not in mainland Japan. They're in Okinawa because it's used as they're indigenous people who are just used as a unsinkable aircraft carrier, just like they use Guam for. Japanese people, of course, they don't want American bases in mainland Japan. That's why there's barely any there.
So it's that's more like NIMBYism, right?
Yeah.
Not in my backyard. So they want the American base, but they don't want it next to them. But obviously, I don't know if a Japanese party stood and said, let's get rid of the American bases, they probably wouldn't do very well. Or would they? I don't know.
Of course, no, they would. I mean, the point is that every single administrator of Okinawa, I mean, I'm looking at Okinawa, which is where the bases are, they have all rejected.
Yeah. But what I mean is the people,
presence.
so there are lots of nations where they want US presence in their country. In this particular case, there's an island that's part of Japan. So the argument would be that Japan should move the US base to the mainland, potentially, if they still want one.
I don't even know what you're asking, sorry.
Well, I'm saying, so basically, I think there's an argument about US bases. I mean, I think there are too many, but I think you also have to contend with the argument that there are lots of countries who want to remain.
Bases in Japan? Wait,
because there are lots of countries that want to remain part of the umbrella.
Why are we arguing about why it's right to have a base in Japan? Like, wait, why are you saying? So you're saying the Japanese government wants it to protect them from China?
China, potentially. I mean, in the same way that the Estonians want the NATO base to protect them from Russia. I mean, there are lots of countries that want to be part of that umbrella. And I feel like that's worth considering, right? It's not.
No, I don't think there's any evidence that shows that China's a threat to Japan. So I don't.
What about Russia a threat to Estonia?
Look. There's no, like, what evidence is there that Russia's trying to invade any countries outside of Ukraine? Can you tell me what, did Russia say that?
There are lots of people arguing that they wouldn't have invaded Ukraine in the first place, right? And then they did. So I think the argument that no one has to worry at all about Russia when they've just invaded Ukraine is...
Right, but that was, it didn't just happen in a vacuum. So is there anything else that is giving you the insight that Russia is trying to position itself to, like, take over, like, be an imperialist power?
The Estonians and the Latvians are definitely worried about it, aren't they? And I don't think they're completely irrational and crazy to worry about having Russia on their doorstep. It seems to me a fairly reasonable fear for them to have that.
Again,
and for them to want
it's
to
kind of
be
like the
part
chicken
of NATO to defend themselves.
It's kind of like the chicken and the egg thing for me. I go back to the source of the terrorism and the instability in the world. That's the main source of it, which is my government. So it's really hard to justify the existence of NATO because of what I feel like the main source of this is my government driving what has basically legitimized NATO in the eyes of these leaders that you're talking about, to say, no, we need NATO because of the conditions that the US has put on the world. So I want to go back to the source.
And you think if the American military sort of withdraws from the world, it'll become more peaceful?
Well, that's a cartoonish, childlike way to look at it. I mean, yeah, over time, I think that we need to just have, look, I want to demilitarize my community first. Let's free the UK from US imperialism first. Let's have, like, hyper-localized efforts where we can have that international framework. But of course, I think that we're not going to survive as a species unless we demilitarize and decommission the global military empire. We're not going to survive.
Yeah. I just think that if there's always going to be there's always going to be militarization, right? So the Americans...
Does there need to be an empire, though? A global military empire?
There normally has been some form of hegemony.
A global dictatorship that's literally taken over every...
Well, I mean, I'm into multipolarity, but I think that's going to involve us spending money on our military as well, right? So I just think there isn't an easy answer where we just say militarism can decline and that means that emissions go down. I think there needs to be an argument as to how...
Well, yeah, okay.
All these countries can sort of maintain their security, and that's probably going to mean a very slow drawdown of the Americans, perhaps.
Why don't we start with, instead of having a military solution, why don't we start with an actual diplomatic solution? Instead of saying, how could these countries respond unless they have, the power of the U.S. standing over them? Why don't we actually apply laws? International law, and stop having war criminals just run free and run amok and gallivant around the world. We need to hold people accountable for their crimes. And then maybe we can talk about demilitarizing the planet if we have a standard of law that applies to every single country, every leader, and then maybe we would bow down to the law and respect humanity. But right now it's really impossible when you have one country that is dominating the planet and subjugating the entire planet. And so it's really difficult to say, yeah, we just need to demilitarize the world. Well, not under these conditions, we can't.
What do you think is going to happen to US empire? Do you think it's on the wane?
Of course. You said yourself, it's obvious, right? I mean, that's why it's lashing out. That's why it's so desperate. That's why it has to invert reality, because it only exists on the weight of its own propaganda. Of course, the military empire too. But we see how easy it is to shut down the arteries of capital. That's the language that these people speak. So it's not impossible to defeat. It just takes strategy and tactics. You can't defeat it militarily. But yes, of course, I see it waning. That's why it did this. That's why it went to war with Iran. Because that's why it's trying to get Greenland. That's why it's trying to go after the Arctic. It's like the last vestiges of everything that's left. They're just trying to go for it and use the chaos presidency to do it.
And do you think American politics can sort of survive a post-imperial moment? Obviously, we've got Donald Trump now. Do you think this is just inevitable, that sort of like, now America is no longer the unrivaled hegemon? It's just going to be in this sort of tailspin of chaos.
I mean, let's hope that it doesn't start a nuclear war. I think that it can survive. What is it going to look like? I don't know. But it's definitely on its way out. I mean, just like Rome, I mean, military empires can only survive for so long. It's going to overextend just as it is now, and it's going to collapse. But yeah, I don't know what it's going to look like in that final stage. It's not going to be pretty. And that's where the rest of the world comes into play.
Abby Martin, how can people see your movie?
EarthsGreatestEnemy.com, coming out in 1 month on streaming, so check it out.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on NovaraLIVE, a real privilege having you here.
Thanks so much.
Thank you guys for watching tonight. We'll be back tomorrow at 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Live. Good night.